Welcome to Appointed Counsel, a podcast presented by Tennessee Court Talk for those involved in indigent representation. I'm Joe Byrd, lead attorney for the Indigent Services team of the Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts.
Episode 18, Experts and Investigators. And today we have with us Laura Hood, who takes care of reviewing all of our expert and investigator invoices and orders. And so, Laura, we're glad that you're here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Laura, you have been a regular employee here at the AOC for a few years. How long have you been employed here?
I've been with the AOC for 24 years.
24 years. And you were 10 years old when you started. You're 34 years old, I think.
Is correct.
That right? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So, Laura, we're so glad that you're here. Tell us a little bit about what you've done over these 24 years here at the AOC.
When I started 24 years ago, I was in the fiscal department, and I was working on attorney fee claims originally, and then about 15 years ago, I was moved into the experts and investigators just to do the audit and also did some of the court reporters initially.
So now it's interesting that you said you were with Fiscal, and that gives me a great opportunity to explain something for our attorney listeners.
Okay.
Prior to my coming 2 years ago, the Indigent Services team was a part of Fiscal.
Correct.
And that sort of made sense because you all were processing claims for payments. Mm-hmm. But what was lacking, as I understand it, was that there wasn't an attorney kind of at the head who understood the process in the courts across the system. And so by bringing me on board, part of the idea was you would have an attorney who would oversee. So we actually brought the entire team out of the Fiscal Division, and we're technically in the Legal Services and Judicial Development Division of the AOC under General Counsel John Koch. But we're our own team, and we're part of the legal division. And but you've been doing, you said 15 years you've been doing experts and investigators, and that's really where I want to focus in today. So when we're talking about experts and investigators aren't available for every case that is handled and paid through the AOC. Is that right?
That's correct.
So like if I was handling just a standard dependency and neglect case, would I be able to get an investigator for my case?
No, the only cases that are approved are going to be listed under 5A.
Yeah, under Rule 13,
under Rule 13.
Section 5A.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those are criminal cases. There's only a couple of times in juvenile cases, I think if I remember Rule 5A, right, that would be for juvenile transfer hearings where they're going to try the child potentially as an adult. And then the second time, a change that was under my time being here, where the court revised the rule where if there's a reason for juvenile delinquency cases and there is a question of mental capacity at the time of the offense, then there can be an expert. We don't see those very often. It's usually juvenile transfer proceedings in these cases that we see experts, investigators. Usually almost everything else is criminal, I think, if I'm not wrong.
That is correct, criminal. Mm-hmm.
So we say experts and investigators, and those are two specific sections under Section 5 of the rule. We know that there's different kinds of things that are required in the court, but the AOC has a responsibility to approve those claims too, right?
That is correct.
And tell me now, so an attorney just can't go out and just say, okay, I'm going to hire you, investigator X, to work on this case, and then submit an invoice to us, can they?
No, they must submit an order and a motion, have it signed by the judge, and then it must be sent in to the AOC for the lead general counsel for their approval. Once it's approved, they would receive a copy of that approved order. Then they can request their expert to start their services.
Yeah, that's an excellent description because for those cases that can get experts and investigators, and I would encourage attorneys to read over carefully Section 5A, they will see the cases that can get experts and investigators. They first have to get that prior approval done prior approval order from the court. And
Correct.
the court has to make some particular things. They need to really look at Section 5A because that order has to have certain things in it, like, if an expert's outside of the 150 miles from the courthouse, an explanation for everything they tried to do to find an expert within that range, the particularized need, the court. That's part of the court's determination. The fees that are in our schedule, it used to be in Rule 13, the fees that are in our schedule are deemed reasonable, but that fee has to be. That brings me to an interesting question. You and I have talked about this recently. What if an expert says, I'll do it for $4,000? Can we just accept an invoice for $4,000 and approve an order that says it's a block fee for $4,000?
No, we cannot. We do not accept block billing.
Yeah, so it has to have an hourly rate to it.
That is correct.
And actually Section 5 talks about it having an hourly rate. And I like what some judges do. Some judges want the experts and even the investigators to sort of give a description, a general description of the kinds of activities they would do and that are necessary in this case. The process then is that they go to the court, they get the prior approval order, and then that order is sent to us. Now, do they have to take paper copy, put it in an envelope, and put it in the mail to us?
No, we prefer it to be emailed. We have a indigent defense email address that they can submit their request to, and that's where the ball gets rolling. The order will go to the lead counsel for their approval. Once it's approved, one of our staff members will email them back with a copy of the approved order.
And when you say general counsel and you say the attorney, you're basically talking about me.
Yes, I am talking about you, Joe Byrd.
But we don't want them emailing me.
No.
We want them to email it to this box. It's indigentteam@tncourts.gov.
That is correct.
All one word, INDIGENTTEAM @tncourts.gov. And then it gets put in my queue for me to review. And I review those on a daily basis because sometimes we gotta move those prior approvals. And I review it. Now, I'm not reviewing it. Let me talk a little bit about my review. My review is not the judge's review. The judge is looking at particularized need. He's looking at different things. I'm looking to see, does it comply with Rule 13 generally? And then is the fee within the schedule and everything that is required under the rule? Sometimes we will put down an incremental approval. And can you tell us a little bit about the incremental approvals at all?
A lot of times what I am seeing on the incremental approvals, we have our experts that, let's say they get approved for $2,500 instead of their whole $5,000. They tend to go over the $2,500, and then we're having to go back in and request those additional funds be released.
Yeah. Let me just kind of back up just a little bit so everybody understands. So on the fee schedule, there are certain incremental amounts, initial incremental amounts. So someone might get an order that's approved for $10,000, but based upon the nature of the charges in the criminal case, the incremental amount, let's say they get $10,000 for an investigator. That is approved by the court up to $10,000, but we will not approve that initially only up to $5,000. And the reason is, and that was set up by one of the chief justices years ago, it's sort of just a little speed bump to slow everybody down. These are taxpayer dollars. We want you to be sensitive about how that you're using it. And then it's a simple thing to get the other money released. All they have to do is email the original order to us and explain that the funds have been depleted and that they need to have the rest of the funds released. And then we flip it around almost 24 hours, within 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours back to them. Another thing I like to always point out is the email that you send it from is the email we're going to send it back to. So make sure that whoever's sending us the email is the person who's taking care of getting the email back to your expert or investigator. Yeah, and the rates too. If they have a rate that's too high that we haven't had approved, that the Chief Justice hasn't approved, we will either deny it, and then they can always ask to have the Chief Justice give consideration. We do that. I wouldn't say all the time, but that happens. In fact, the Chief Justice just recently handed down an approval of one that I had to deny because it was over our rate. But we send them up to the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice reviews them. It's not a formal appeal process or anything like that. It's just another review by the Chief Justice. So your role, though, is you get started kind of right at the beginning. Now, I like to explain sometimes to people that ACAP wasn't always created with everything in mind, and that's particularly true when it comes to experts and investigators. We have kind of a manual process that you have to do. I do know that we made some changes with investigators where they're able to put their own claims into ACAP now, but particularly with experts, though, you have a manual process you have to go through. Explain that to us a little bit.
Well, that is still with the experts as well as the investigators. It's called a pre-approval number. Before, let's say, an investigator can start their invoice from home or their office, they must get a pre-approval number. So they email me or the indigent box, as we talked about, requesting a pre-approval number.
Which we fondly call the P number.
The P number, yes. It's called the P number.
Right.
So once they request it, I will go in manually and create a P number, pre-approval number for them. Once the P number has been approved, I'll assign it to the expert or investigator and then email them that number. And they can begin their invoice. They can start their invoice.
So the investigators can actually put in their own claims in ACAP once they get that P number. And then for experts, we don't expect experts to learn this whole system, but the attorney has to approve their invoice, and then and we have a form now for the attorneys to use that they really can use it for the investigators, so they don't have to give us invoices. But now the experts have to give us the invoice, and it still has to be a breakdown of the dates of service. That's not something we require. That's F&A's requirement,
Yes.
dates of service.
Yes.
And it has to be based on that hourly rate that was
Correct.
approved, and because
Correct.
we have to match all those things up. And then that invoice comes through, and you have to review those too, don't you?
Yes, I do.
So talk about that process.
Just the process is I'm looking for, of course, number one, the approval number, which I'll already have, but then I need the dates, as you said, the dates, a brief description of their activity along with their rate of pay. And I'm looking at when the order was approved by you, the lead counsel, and we need to make sure that they did not start prior to getting AOC approval. So that's one of the main things I'm looking for.
Yeah, and you said me, but we do have Jean Gear in
Yes,
the
we
legal
do.
division who helps me out a great deal. And prior to that, Laura Blunt was also
Yes.
helping us out. So, but they help me, and so I appreciate Jean's assistance. So because of this manual process and having to create the claims and how everything goes through, we're not able to stay within a 30-day target for the most time on these experts and investigators. It's about 45 days has to be the goal once we get the claims filed. Is that right?
Yes, but I'm really working hard on getting to that 35-day mark.
And I have to point out for everybody so that they understand that you're the only person who does experts and investigators. It's first of all, it kind of has a specialty to it. It does involve a couple of other people. So one person going on vacation or getting sick, it can throw us behind a little bit, and we have to get caught up. So we work on those targets, and I appreciate you trying to get it to 30 days, but our target goal is 45. If we're less than that, it's great. And sometimes we might get a little behind. It might go over 45, but we work hard to keep it right around there. Let me just ask you, if for reasons that you have seen claims returned or invoices returned, what do you think are some of the things that you would tell experts and investigators or the attorneys who hire them? What are some of the things you see that come up as problems sometimes in this area?
In that area, a lot, what I'm seeing is missing the attorney approval. So when you submit an invoice, you must submit it to your attorney for their review, and they can do that by filling out a form that we have that you have created, Joe, here at the AOC, or they can even sign the invoice, with their signature and date it, stating they approve the expert's invoice.
And let me just add, that's just that requirement for us to do that is because we have the F&A and the comptroller's office will need us to verify that someone's looked at that invoice and approved it. We don't know. We're processing. We don't know what that investigator or expert did. The attorney is supposed to know what they did.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that I'm seeing. Another thing that I'm having I'll have to return invoices or just contact the expert or receipts. All receipts must be attached when submitting your invoices, such as hotel, any kind of people searches, any medical billing that was incurred during the services of the expert.
Let me just say on that, we talked in another podcast with Kendall and with Alyssa, and we talked a little bit about the fact that attorneys don't have to redact the orders that they submit to us. But now on those invoices, particularly like medical records and the invoices, the background checks, they usually have Social Security numbers, EIN numbers. All of that must be redacted, and it will get kicked back to us.
Absolutely.
And that slows the claim down a lot. So if you want to get paid faster and better timing, help us to help you by making sure you redact that personal identification. But it's not out of the orders. It's out of the receipts and all of those documents that are outside of the orders.
Correct. That's correct. And we do see a lot of that in the experts' invoices that are submitted. But I go in there and redact if they've missed the EIN number or a check that was attached if they do not redact the account number.
Yeah.
So we'll go and redact that.
Try to redact it out. So what other things do you see that you have to return claims or invoices for?
Well, one thing I do see, Joe, is when they have depleted all their funds, but with that being said, there's still funds available, but only an incremental amount was approved. So now they need to contact the office via email so the additional funds can be released. And I've noticed that a lot of times they don't do that until after the invoice has been submitted.
Yeah, in fact, Section 5 makes pretty clear that before an expert or investigator is supposed to start, they're supposed to have the AOC's approval. So if we only give that incremental approval, it's important that somebody on the team, between the lawyer, the expert, the investigator, is watching how much they have racked up. And if they need to get that approval, it's a simple thing. Just email us I ask everybody to always email us the order that has our approval on it so it's easy for us to find. And just tell us that the funds are depleted, and then just go ahead and just tell us that you need the rest of the money depleted. Now let me ask you this. What if an order goes down that's $10,000. We initially approve it for $5,000. They send us the email, and now they have gone through the second $5,000. So they've blown through all $10,000. Is that it? Is that the end of the trail for them?
Not necessarily. They can have the attorney submit another order requesting more funds to be approved.
Right, and inside baseball for us, we call that additional funds.
An
order for additional funds. And so go back to the court. If the court approves it and gives additional funds, we'll go back through and we'll give the approval and kind of load back up that amount into what they can draw down from. I have something I want to mention to you, Laura. I have seen some attorneys, particularly recently, where in a criminal case, there can be different indictments. There can be different charges, but they're typically informally consolidated, and so they're heard at the same proceeding. And usually there's a global plea if there's going to be a plea agreement, or they're often tried. Now, sometimes there are the occasions where they're separate tracks, but we've seen some experts and investigators, the attorneys, getting separate orders for every single case number. So we'll get 3. And over here is the charge for domestic assault, and then over here's the stalking charge, and the robbery charge or whatever. And they think that they're getting more money, I think, that way, but they're not getting more money. They're actually kind of creating a headache for themselves, aren't they?
Yes, because each one would have to be entered individually, and you have 3 different orders, 3 different case numbers, that's 3 different pre-approvals numbers, the P numbers. So not only is it causing more work for them, it's slowing the indigent, my area, it's going to slow it down because I'm having to create 3 individual case numbers.
Yeah, they're not getting any more money.
No.
If they go in and get one order, even if the court approves it at 15,000, sure, we might only give an incremental approval for a portion of that, but they still are approved for all the way up to that 15,000. The expert investigator is not going to be able to stack all those orders up, and then they have to be careful in their invoicing. They can't just bleed over those. So unless there's 2 separate tracks of proceedings against the one defendant, all of those things should be consolidated into the same order. We'll release those funds incrementally, and then they can get additional funds. It's not getting them any more or any less money. It is creating more work for them, and it's really slowing down their process because we have to make sure that we're tracking everything on each case number and everything. Am I right on that?
You are absolutely right.
Yeah. I've been trying to send emails out to attorneys when I see that happening, saying, please know, and it's not the attorneys. I think some of the investigators, somehow this got started with some, and they because I've had to talk to them, a few of them, to say, no, that's not the way it works. They thought they had to have a separate order for each case number and each charge. And no, if those, put all the case numbers on the same order, it's the same proceeding. Now, if it's separate proceeding, 2 separate courts, obviously, those are 2 separate things altogether.
Correct.
But if it's in the same proceeding, it's all the same hearing, it's all going to be the same trials, all going to be the same, global plea, then just keep it in one order is the best thing to do. Anything else you can think of that you would advise experts or investigators or the attorneys who get them and engage them for their work?
One suggestion is always submit an invoice that's a legible invoice, but always include, like I've said prior, your dates, your hours, a brief description, all your receipts, your approvals. When you submit an invoice with all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, it makes just the process go so much smoother, and I'm not having to send emails or to the attorney or to the expert. And I also never start working on a case unless you have a copy of the approved order that's been approved by the AOC.
I would tell every investigator and expert, do not start until you see a copy that not only has the judge's signature, but mine or Gene Gear's signature approved on it. Then start work. Because getting it fixing that is not something that we will always do all the time, and they need to know that's the requirement. They're not supposed to start work until they get that order from the AOC. So that's good advice, I think, that you've given, and I also think that exactly what you said. Sometimes I think people think because we return things that we get some kind of enjoyment out of returning things. They have no idea. We want it all to be right, to just get it off our desk and to just move it on. So we're as frustrated that we have to return it as they are, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we want to get that. We want to get things through the queue. We want to make our targets, our goals. We want them to get paid on time. For me, selfishly, I was just talking to Alyssa and Kendall, and I said, y'all's queues are always full. They're never empty. When I do the complex and extended reviews, my queue will get empty because I do them once a week, and I probably do about 70 a week, and so I can kind of go through mine pretty quickly because I'm not doing the detailed review you all do and that they do. But I don't know how you live with always having the queue full. Because I want the queue empty, I want it done, and I want to say, okay, now my mind is clear and I can move on to the next thing. But when we return them, then they have to come back and they get recycled and recirculated. And sometimes it starts the process over. Well, any last words, Laura, that you would want to tell the attorneys, the experts, or investigators?
What I'd like to say is back to the orders. If you don't have a copy of that approved order by the AOC, call me or email me, and I'll be glad to email you a copy, and you can get started.
Well, let me just, as the last word in this podcast, say, Laura, if there's an order, you can find it. There are times that I look in our systems to find an order, and I never find it, and I turn to you, and you're always able to seem to find it for me. So I appreciate your help all the time.
You're welcome.
So thank you for being on this podcast for us this week.
Thank you, Joe.
For more information, check out the Indigent Representation webpage at tncourts.gov.